So for our sanctuary rededication tonight, we wanted to really think about where we are in this moment of American Jewish experience and how this space will continue to witness holy moments for us as a Jewish community moving forward. So our first choice for a special guest to help us think about Jewish community today and tomorrow was Sarah Horwitz, our guest tonight. Sarah came to my attention a few years ago with her first book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, after finally choosing to look there. Several people from our congregation came to me enthusiastically reporting a deep resonance with Sarah's personal story in Here All Along. People born and raised Jewish, as well as those who have chosen to become Jewish. Here All Along was a finalist for 2 National Book Awards and for the Sammy Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature. Sarah's latest book, As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Shame, Blame, and Try to Erase Us, is an urgent exploration of how anti-Semitism has shaped Jewish identity and how Jews can reclaim our tradition. Sarah's been on all the biggest Jewish podcasts, speaking with the thought leaders of Jewish life across denominations, across political parties, and across continents. And tonight, she is here at Temple B'nai Israel in Oklahoma City, helping us to dedicate this space with a conversation around some of the most pressing issues of Jewish life today and the issues that are shaping tomorrow. So we are honored and thrilled to present tonight a conversation with Sarah Horwitz.
It is such an incredible honor to be here tonight and to be part of this sanctuary rededication, or dedication, really. This is such a beautiful community. Like, look at all of you. I mean, to have this many people coming out on a cold Saturday night to be in community in this incredibly holy space, it is like a balm for the soul. It is an inspiration. I could not be more honored to be here tonight. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this beautiful moment for your community.
Yeah, we're pretty cool that way. We're good. So you spent 8 years in the White House as a speechwriter. And then you wrote a book about Judaism, which doesn't exactly seem to be the usual next step after a career in politics.
You don't think so? It didn't seem logical?
I mean,
not so much.
I don't think that there are that many that have done that. So can you tell us a little bit about your Jewish journey? Catch people up who haven't read the books yet or haven't listened to the podcast. What prompted that career swerve? And can you share maybe a story or two from your time in politics just to put a bow on that?
So, I grew up like a lot of American Jews, where Judaism for me was 2 boring holidays in the fall, a medium boring holiday in the spring at the Seder, and then Hanukkah, which was great. And that plus like 3 universalistic values like don't lie, cheat, steal, yada, yada, that was the Judaism. And so I kind of didn't find that very compelling and walked away as a young adult. And then at the age of 36, I broke up with this guy I was dating, and I was very lonely and very anxious. And I happened to hear about an Intro to Judaism class at the Washington, D.C. JCC, where I live. And I really signed up just to fill time. Like, this was not a deep spiritual journey. It could have been a karate class or a ceramics class. I probably would have taken it. But what I found in that class just blew me away. It's like 4,000 years of wisdom about what it means to be human. How to be a good person and lead a worthy life and find profound spiritual connection, which was not God as a man with a beard in the sky. I just thought, like, where has this been all my life? Are you kidding me? So I then took another intro class, and I read hundreds of books, and I studied with rabbis, and I just thought, this is hard. Like, it was really hard for me to learn about Judaism as an adult. There were great kind of nuts and bolts intro books that gave me the how-to, and then there were these just god-awful, like, academic books that I had to plod through to get the why to. And I just thought, where is the book that someone like me needs? One that, yes, covers the basics, but more important, goes into the deepest, most transformative, most radical wisdom that we offer. And so my goal was to write that book. And that was my first book. And it's been just a joy to get to talk to people about it, because I really wrote it for Jews like me. But I've had many quite observant Jews say, including Chabad rabbis, be like, actually, this book was for me. I'm like, nope, definitely wasn't. Like, no, this was for me. And I'm like, say more. And they said, look, I don't necessarily agree with how you practice. I don't agree with everything you write, but I see that you have 550 endnotes, and I see, so you did your homework, you respect this tradition, and I also see that you love it. And that's something we share. Mm-hmm. And I just loved that connection to Jews of all different backgrounds all across the country. That has been a real joy.
So you just said it could have been anything. It could have been karate, right? So I don't know. You often describe your first book as a love letter to Jewish tradition. Okay, so maybe God had something to do with that Intro to Judaism class?
Could be. I mean, you're the rabbi. You say so.
The invitation, right? The invitation to be in a loving relationship, maybe. But your second book is a little edgier, and it's clear from the title, which I'm going to try to say without any intonation, okay? So, I mean, I've listened to you with Jonah Platt, and I know, but I'm going to try to say it without intonation. As a Jew, reclaiming our story from those who blame, shame, and try to erase us. So what inspired you to write the second book then? You've got this great response to the first. Across all these areas, it's all about love, and now there's this pivot. So can you give us a little overview about this one?
Yeah, so my first book really was a love letter to Jewish tradition, and my second book is pretty angry. And there were actually a few things that inspired it. The first was that during COVID, I trained to be a hospital chaplain, and whenever I tell people that, they're like, chaplain, are you still Jewish? Like, no, I am. But chaplaincy is universal. It's for people of all backgrounds can be chaplains, but it's called chaplain, which is a Christian word. And in my classes, we talked about our ministry, and I was told, prayer is, God, please heal my friend, this lovely rabbi sitting next to me who can hear me praying out loud from my heart right in front of her out loud, which is a beautiful way to pray. Jews, of course, can pray that way if they want, but you don't see it that often. I wouldn't say that's the most common form of Jewish prayer, but I was told, no, you pray for all patients that way. That is prayer. It's universal. As long as you don't say Jesus, it's universal. I thought, no, it's really not. And I began to realize that growing up in a Christian country, I was so soaked in Christianity. I spoke Christian language, had Christian thoughts, thought in Christian imagery. I mean, even the idea that I always had that spirituality meant our bodies are kind of bad, gross, less than, carnal, and there's a spirit realm that's good and holy and sacred, and the goal is to transcend this meat package, meat envelope body for this non-corporeal realm, body-soul duality. That's not really a central Jewish idea. That's more of a Christian idea, but I just thought, just spirituality. My patients in the hospital, my Christian patients would often ask me to bring them a Bible, and when I would, they would just open it up and read it and say, this gives me comfort. I connect to God this way. They really had a very profound relationship just reading the text straight up. And that's how I used to think you should read the Torah, which, give it a try sometimes. It's not quite the kind of book you just sit down and read. It's weird, it's old, it's violent in parts, it's not going to comfort you. I thought, wow, I used to read the Torah like a Christian, right? I had all these ideas that were from the majority around me, and I realized I'd been handed all of these keys that I thought were universal keys, but they weren't. They were really Christian keys, and I wasn't able to unlock Judaism with them. And I'll say the second thing that really inspired this book is I visited a college campus in 2022, well before October 7th, and I was speaking to students at the Hillel, the Jewish Students Organization, and they kept asking me what I did, how I responded to anti-Semitism when I was in college. And I was literally like, what? I couldn't understand the question. I'm like, college in the 90s, I could have run through my campus, wrapped in an Israeli flag, screaming, I am a Zionist, and no one would have cared. Would have been weird, but would not have gotten me, assaulted. Don't try that on a campus today. And so I thought, something is off here, especially in the wake of the 2021 Israel-Gaza war. The stuff I was seeing online, the hatred, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Zionism, something was off here. And finally, I started really reflecting during COVID about my Jewish identity for most of my life, for the first 36 years of my life, which was, I'm Jewish, but not that Jewish. Like, what? Is that one long word? Like, what is that? Like, I'm just a cultural Jew. Which, by the way, if you actually are a cultural Jew, if you connect to Judaism through thought, history, Israel, food, music, literature, that is gorgeous.
Please don't use the word just,
Yes,
right?
Like, that's a really powerful way to be a Jew, but that's not what I was. That's actually being a cultural Jew. I was not a cultural Jew. I was a contentless Jew. My Judaism was ha-ha Seinfeld, ha-ha misogynistic Jewish mother joke. It was this very empty, kind of embarrassed Jewish identity. Mm-hmm. Or I'd often say, oh, social justice is my Judaism. But why couldn't Judaism be my Judaism? Why all the caveats, the apologies, the I'm sorry, I'm not like those Jews who are so Jewy. Sorry, is that a problem? What was that? So I really began to kind of reflect on, what was that? And so I took a deep dive through history, and just to give the sort of TLDR, summary, is what I found is that my Jewish identity for the first 36 years of my life that I thought was so freely chosen. I thought it was empowering, and me being this modern, cool Jew, it wasn't freely chosen. This was basically a response of, it was the very sad result of 2,000 years of anti-Semitism and 200 years of Jews trying to escape that persecution by erasing ourselves, by assimilating, by trying to fit in. And once I made that discovery, I was kind of furious. And I really wanted to write a book about discovering all these layers of internalized anti-Semitism, self-hatred, shame, stripping them away, and then turning back to my tradition with reverence, curiosity, awe, and love. And I think that's something that many Jews share with me, right? I think this has kind of been a journey that we have all been going on for a couple hundred years now, and this is kind of a moment of reckoning, and that's really what this book is about.
You mentioned the chaplaincy, and I want to mention that the Oklahoma City Police Department has a rabbi who works for them as a chaplain. She's here tonight.
Amazing.
And it is amazing.
Raise her
and
hand. Where is she?
That Kanan, Rabbi Kanan Goldstein.
Oh my gosh, so cool. Okay.
And also, all of the conservative rabbis in the state of Oklahoma are here. All three of them. How cool is that?
Oh my. Okay. See, this is the kind of Jewish community I like to see.
Right? Rabbi Kamen came all the way from Tulsa, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Wow.
So, which leads me to, you're talking about why do we have to have this adjective of, well, as a Reform Jew, as a conservative Jew, as a reconstructing Jew, like as a cultural Jew. So this title, as a Jew. As a Jew, right?
Yes.
What's with the title?
So the title is interesting. I'm very bad at titles. My titles are way too long, and I can't even remember them. When you were reading the title of my first book, I was like, oh God, should have made it shorter.
No, it's so good though. It's so fun.
It's like the whole book is there. But I was struggling to come up with a title, and I was in Israel a few months after October 7th, which was a very powerful and devastating experience. And I had the honor of meeting Amir Tibon, who, if you haven't sort of heard about his story, it is the most extraordinary October 7th story where he and his family were trapped in their kibbutz down south, and his father, who is a retired military general, gets in the car with his mother, of course, and they travel down the country, getting into firefights, rescuing people, and they finally rescue him. It's a harrowing story. But I was talking to him about the book, and he said, well, why don't you just call it As a Jew? I'm okay, random Israeli guy, I think that is actually my title. And the reason I liked it is actually exactly what you said. I none of this, I think that the labels you gave it were actually lovely. Those are positive, affirming labels of denominations that are positive. Whereas I was doing a lot of dismissiveness, a lot of, I'm not that. And so I thought, no more just a this Jew or just a that, or as a Jew, period, a Jew. And I will just say secondarily, I have noticed that there are some Jews out there who like to kind of weaponize their Jewishness to attack other Jews, which I don't love. And if they are going to say as a Jew and then say something very hurtful about other Jews, I'm going to play that game as well, and I'm going to use it to say positive things about all of my people. So I thought, if they're going to play that game, I'm going to play too. And so I reclaimed that phrase for Jewish pride and love and community.
Thank you for that. So let's talk about some specifics, because there's lots of these broad ideas about, right, 4,000 years, as you said, of Jewish history. So you wrote that for most of your life, you thought that anti-Semitism was sort of this mystery, and I quote, an eternal, inexplicable phenomenon that has always existed in the world. And I want to say that I wish that I had had this book in particular when I had a meeting one time with someone who's not Jewish who scheduled a, 20, 30-minute meeting with me, sat down in my study and said, so I want you to explain to me, why is there anti-Semitism in the world? And my response was not as good as your book. It was, I don't know, I love the Jews, you're going to have to ask an anti-Semite, which didn't really get us very far. It didn't get us very far. So why did you think that it had always existed? And then when you studied the history of anti-Semitism, what did you find?
So I think, like a lot of American Jews, my only anti-Semitism education was Holocaust education. So I learned that the Germans lost World War I, blamed the Jews. Then there was a depression, they blamed the Jews, and then they killed them all. Why? Because of prejudice, scapegoating, and the darkness of the human heart. I was 13, I was like, okay, sounds good. But if you were a clever 13-year-old and you asked, but why the Jews in particular? You'd get the same answer. Prejudice, scapegoating, we're learning about prejudice, universal prejudice. So you might walk away like I did thinking like, oh, anti-Semitism's a mystery. Just kind of people always need an other. It's kind of a generic hatred baked into the universe. That is not true. There is nothing whatsoever mysterious about anti-Semitism. The answer to why the Jews and why the Holocaust is in large part because of 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism, which led to the thinking that led to the Holocaust. And that is not my insight. That is the insight and hard work of generations of really renowned Christian scholars, and also of all the major Christian denominations who have done extraordinary work in recent decades, really uncovering their historic anti-Judaism and renouncing it. Mm-hmm. You know, I want them to get the credit for what they've done, so I think that's really important to acknowledge. But, try teaching that in an American public school. Y'all live in Oklahoma. You can tell me how well that would go. Not well. So I thought it's a mystery. It's not. There was pagan anti-Semitism before Christianity, but Christianity actually wound up theologizing it. The New Testament is two groups of Jews. They're all Jews. They're fighting. They then part ways. Some of them stay Jewish. Some become Christians. And many early Christian church leaders sought to define Christianity oftentimes in opposition to Judaism. So you have these three themes that became very sort of baked into Christian tradition, which was portraying Jews as diabolically powerful, so powerful they were able to kill Jesus, as tremendously depraved, again, so depraved they would kill Jesus, and as in a conspiracy. There aren't many of them, but they work together to do their powerful, depraved ways. This winds its way through Western thought. And then in the modern times, it makes its way to the Muslim world, which had its own pretty negative views about Jews and Christians as kind of second-class citizens, but as kind of weak and pathetic. Jews were not really central to Islam the way they were to Christianity, but as these Christian ideas about Jews wind their way into the Muslim world, you get these Islamist ideas about anti-Semitism, which you see in Hamas, Al-Qaeda, etc. The Soviets also got in on the action, because why not? But of course, for them, it was not the Jews that were the problem, right? The Nazis hated Jews, and the Nazis were the Soviets' enemies. Wasn't the Jews, it was the Zionists, which may sound familiar. Those are that Soviet anti-Zionism, that Islamist anti-Semitism, that's what you're seeing a lot of today, but we don't really teach kids about that. And the reality is that anti-Semitism gets upgrades. The pagan anti-Semitism, which said, like, Jews are bad, they don't worship our gods, that then was upgraded to the Christian anti-Semitism, and the church leaders were the thinking elites, right? They said, like, look, Jews are depraved, they killed Jesus. That was what the respectable people thought. Centuries later, the respectable, enlightened 19th century European gentleman would not say that, of course. He had science that said that Jews were racially inferior. And then today, the problem is not our religion or our race, it's our nation. The problem is we only teach kids about Upgrade 3.0. We teach them about Nazi racial anti-Semitism, so they have no idea what is going on today, when what we're seeing is actually not that. We've gotten, unfortunately, an upgrade. So I think I, like a lot of people, really didn't understand anti-Semitism until I wrote this book.
Yeah. I'll mention that I was invited several years ago already, and pre-COVID, long time, when my hair was still short, to a Lutheran church, partially because the pastor, who's very dear, wanted to publicly apologize to the Jews in front of his congregation on a Sunday morning for all of the writings of Martin Luther that were anti-Semitic. I, of course, didn't know when I got there that that was what was going to happen.
No.
But, you know,
That's awkward.
like you said, Oklahoma. But it was, but I mean, really, it really was weighing on his heart.
Oh
And
my
he wanted to
gosh.
do something to show his congregation, this is not who we are.
This is so many Christian leaders have done such good work, and it breaks my heart to now see some of that work being undone by people who are bringing back this Jews killed Jesus stuff, which they rejected, right? I really want to honor these denominations and leaders who've done this important work, and
Yeah.
it's, you know, they're really working to kind of reclaim, you know, to take a different direction in history.
Right, so that's what all of these, or some, I should say, some of these amazing partners out there are doing. And in your book, you offer several frameworks for how to understand this anti-Semitism that we're seeing today. So what about those frameworks for us?
Yeah. So the first one is the upgrade, just recognizing that anti-Semitism, it's like a virus. It kind of mutates, but you can still see those three themes of power, depravity, and conspiracy in any version of anti-Semitism. The second one I want to offer is the difference between what the scholar Bernard Harrison calls social anti-Semitism and political. We often think of anti-Semitism as this like personal social kind of prejudice, like, oh, Jews are cheap, dirty, crass, I don't want them in my country club, I don't want one to marry my daughter. That kind of anti-Semitism still exists, but I think what we more often see today is what he calls a kind of political anti-Semitism, which says that we, the majority, are engaged in a grand moral project, and the only thing stopping us is the Jews. The Jews are what stand in the way of all goodness in society. So 2,000 years ago, it was we, the Christians, are Christianizing the Roman Empire. What is stopping us? These Jews who won't convert. Centuries later, it was we, the communists, are bringing about the revolution of man, the great, you know, brotherhood of man. Who is stopping us? These capitalist, industrialist Jews. Then, a few centuries later, in Nazi Germany, it was we, you know, the pure, racially pure Aryan nation. We are bringing about this great fatherland. Who is stopping us? These race-polluting Jews. Today, unfortunately, you see this on both the right and the left. On the right, you have people who are promulgating this absolutely outrageous great replacement conspiracy. There's this idea that Jews are somehow importing black and brown immigrants to take the place of white Christians. I don't know whether this is more racist or more anti-Semitic. It's utterly offensive. You see Tucker Carlson and people like that promoting this conspiracy. And on the left, you have people who say, you know, we, the social justice people, we who are doing the great project of anti-colonialism and anti-racism, who is stopping us? These racist, colonialist Zionists. So you're kind of just seeing this on both sides, and often the people who are saying this stuff, they don't hate Jews. They have Jewish friends. Some of them are Jews themselves, and that's very confusing because actually this is anti-Semitism, and, you know, it's not social anti-Semitism, it's a political kind of anti-Semitism. The last framework I'll offer is from Dara Horn, who's a dear friend of mine. If you haven't read her book, People Love Dead Jews, I highly recommend it. And she talks about how there is a kind of eliminationist anti-Semitism which says the Jews are bad, nothing they can do to be good, we're going to kill them. That is the Holocaust, that is pogroms, we learned about that in 8th grade. But there's another kind of anti-Semitism that says, we agree, the Jews are bad, but there actually is something they can do to maybe be saved. And that is they can convert. So centuries ago, it was convert to Christianity and maybe we won't burn you at the stake. Maybe not, we'll see. That was centuries ago. In my parents' and grandparents' generation, it was convert to being a WASP, whatever that means. Change your last name, get a nose job. Don't be so, quote, Jewy. You know, don't talk with your hands like I'm doing. You know, be more civilized, be more classy. And if you convert to a WASP, maybe you can join our country club. Today, the demand is convert to being an anti-Zionist, and then you will be the acceptable and good kind of Jew. And you see this definitely on college campuses, and it is just like, it's really heartbreaking for me to hear a Jewish student saying something along the lines of, you know, growing up, my rabbi and my parents told me Israel was perfect and amazing and wonderful, and then I got to college, and I heard that it's actually this racist, colonialist state, and I had an epiphany. I saw the light, and I took anti-colonialism and anti-racism into my heart, And I became an anti-Zionist, and now I am saved. And their classmates are like, now you are saved. You are an acceptable Jew. It's really devastating, this kind of conversionist anti-Semitism, because it doesn't always code as the kind of anti-Semitism we're used to. There aren't swastikas and Nazis. It's just, the request is that we just reject whatever aspect of Jewish civilization the majority finds disgusting. And as long as we do that, we're fine. But God forbid, if any majority ever did that to any other minority, if they said to women, you have to reject the feminist movement and then you're acceptable. If they said to black people, you have to reject Black Lives Matter and then you're the good kind, then we'll accept you. That's outrageous, right? That's sexism and racism.
Although it also happens.
It also happens, and it's unacceptable. But I think we recognize that as racism, sexism, very clearly. But when people are telling us that we have to reject part of our identity, we don't always see this anti-Semitism, but it is.
So are there some solutions? I mean, what do we do now in light of the challenges that we're facing? And, there's also within that piece of there are very committed Jewish people who are anti-Zionist because it is a part of how, this congregation, our first rabbi, Rabbi Blatt, was certainly anti-Zionist and didn't want to see or wasn't interested, right, in Israel. So, of course, that was also before the founding of the state.
Yeah, I would say that's a very different.
But I think that we have to be careful with it because I'm thinking about there are people. I'm sure that you've met with them, as I have, in Israel, who are ultra Orthodox, who don't teach their children Hatikva, who don't even go out on Yom Ha'atzmaut because, God forbid, their children should be exposed to the idea of Israel. So there's some nuances, or I certainly personally know women who are not feminists, and so everything's kind of this bell curve.
Yeah, and those are, if people are freely choosing that as their identity,
right.
that's a different thing.
That's exactly the
I
nuance.
also think it's a little different to be an anti-Zionist before the state exists.
Yeah,
because
fair.
now being an anti-Zionist means wanting to eliminate a sovereign state that's existed for 80 years, and it's often the only state that's wanted to be eliminated.
Right.
Which does raise some questions.
A lot of questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
For sure. And so maybe that's really what we go into is how are you thinking about Israel these days?
Yeah, this is the thing that I think, I'm seeing these fault lines in our community. I'm seeing just a broader, incredible obsession with Israel. Sort of the way that people were obsessed with Jews in the 1800s about the Jewish question. Could Jews be citizens of Germany and France, or were they aliens? Was something wrong with them? Generally, when people are obsessing about Jews, it's not great, and I think we're seeing that again, although it's put in the context of Israel or Zionists, but it's sort of the same thought process. When I talk about Israel, I try to be very clear. I say, I am a Zionist, and let me tell you what that means. Zionism is the national independence movement of the Jewish people. It's the belief that Jews have the right to self-determination in the state of Israel, just like Latvians have in Latvia and Japanese people have in Japan, and I very much hope that Palestinians will one day have in Palestine. And the reason that I believe that is because we did run the counter-experiment to that for 2,000 years, and the result was millions of murdered Jews. And I'm not really interested in repeating that counter-experiment. And I know that counter experiment would repeat if we didn't have Israel, because I saw it try to repeat after the founding of Israel, when 850,000 Jews had to flee Arab lands because they were brutally persecuted. Most of them went to Israel. 2 million Russian Jews had to flee brutal anti-Zionism, which actually was anti-Semitism in Russia. 1 million of them fled to Israel. 100,000 Ethiopian Jews had to flee persecution in Ethiopia, went to Israel. We could do this all night. I'm not really interested in having those people either be murdered or be refugees, so I really feel strongly about the existence of the Jewish state. And, I'm a proud Zionist, and I really have a lot of fierce criticisms of this current Israeli government. I'm very, very critical. I'm also a patriotic American, and I have criticisms of certain American presidents. And my patriotism, my love of this country doesn't change depending on who is the president. It is the steady rock of my existence. Just like my Zionism doesn't change depending on who is in office in Israel. It is a steady rock of my existence, and I'm going to criticize poor leadership in either country. So to me, that's not all that complicated. But I have to say, I've been giving this little spiel everywhere I go. And then I started reading the work of a brilliant thinker named Adam Lewis Klein. He started an organization called Movement Against Anti-Zionism. I highly recommend following him. And he made a point that really got under my skin, which was something along the lines of, and I'm sort of implying from his work, this is not a direct quote, but if someone came up to you and said, you know what, people from this particular group, whether it be racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, people from this group are not as smart as others, they're predisposed to commit crimes, you would never respond by saying, wait, I can show you studies that show those people aren't less smart, and I can show you reports that say they don't commit crime. You would never engage with that. You would say, that is bigotry, no thank you, right? That's a bigoted lie. It's not content to engage with, it's just bigotry, it's an ism. But people say to us, a state that has existed for 80 years, a sovereign state that is recognized by the UN and many, many countries worldwide, that is the one state that must immediately be eliminated. And then they support that by what Lewis Klein calls a bunch of libel vomit. Apartheid, colonialism, genocide, racism, source of all the world problems just kind of dumped on us. And we, instead of saying like, oh, I believe that's a form of bigotry, no thank you, I go into this long explanation about the Peel Commission report of 1937 and 1948 and this study and this fact and actually Area C and like, why am I doing that? When I actually read his work, I thought, gosh, maybe this is actually a form of bigotry. And I understand there are anti-Zionists who disagree with nations. I understand that anti-Zionism is quite diverse, but in the form that we are often getting, I kind of wonder if me treating that as content is perhaps a mistake. That said, I do think I need to educate people. I will give my spiel because I think many people don't understand Jewish history. They don't know why it is so important we have a state. So I am going to continue doing that education work. But I also just want to own that I shouldn't have to. Mm-hmm. I want to own that there's something a little bit humiliating about that in my mind.
Yeah, and so I know that people ask you all the time, so what are we supposed to be doing to fight anti-Semitism? Yeah. So what's your answer then to that question?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I also find it to be like such a moving question because it actually, it's often phrased to me as like self-blame of like, we're terrible at PR. Like if we just had better PR, if we had the right tweet, we could really fight this, but we're screwing it up. It's us. And guys, I love you, but there are 16 million of us, that's with an M. That's like a neighborhood of Shanghai. We are a tiny people, and there are billions of people who really don't like us. And this idea that we are going to somehow change the mind of billions of people, please try. I think it's great when people are trying to change people's minds, but to say that this is our fault and we're screwing it up, I don't think that's quite fair. The reality is that anti-Semitism tends to wax and wane, not really based on what Jews do, but on whether there is a plague or an economic crisis. And I will say that Jews in America did incredible work in the mid-20th century to change laws and to end discrimination against Jews. So there's certainly things we can do. But what I'm much more concerned about is making sure that all 16 million of us are proud, passionate, committed, joyful Jews. That to me, I think, is actually the best way to fight anti-Semitism. Because the truth is, if you had come to me 12 years ago when my Jewish identity was nothing but a big empty void with a few ethnic jokes rattling around in it, and you had said to me, Sarah, Jewish religion, it's like violent and vengeful with an angry, hateful God. It's not really about love, it's about law. What would I have said? I knew nothing about Jewish tradition. Would I have been like, Tikkun Olam? That's not a great answer. If someone had come to me and said Israel is a genocidal, racist, Nazi state, and I knew nothing about Israel or Jewish history, I was going to be like, I like bagels? When your Jewish identity, as mine was, is a big empty void, it will be filled by what is around us, and what's around us is a lot of anti-Semitism. So if you don't know your Jewish story, stories will be told about Jews, and you will begin to believe them. Right. And I see this happening to Jews all across the country. We don't, who were just like me, right, through no fault of our own, just didn't have the Jewish content, the substance, and they're beginning to believe these stories. So I think the most important thing we can do, not just to fight anti-Semitism, which who knows if we can, but to just embrace who we are, to celebrate our traditions, to do what you all are doing here tonight. This is actually my answer to how you fight anti-Semitism. It's this. It's with community, it's with content, it's with joy, it's with pride. This is the answer here too.
This morning in Torah study, first Shabbat of the month, we always study the Haftorah for whatever that happens to be. And we read something out, or I read to the group something out of one of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs's books.
I love him.
I know. Zichrono livracha. And it was something along the lines of, in the modern times, Jews have really overachieved. I mean, we've done pretty good with culture and higher education and all these things. And he says, Judaism has underachieved. That for all of the things that we've kind of done in this big world and all the ways that we've learned and excelled, we haven't given that same emphasis to digging into Judaism. So you quote in your book, and maybe this is one of the reasons why, your friend and author Dara Horn, and we actually had a book club a few summers ago for her Dead Jews book. But she writes, Judaism has always been uncool, going back to its origins as the planet's only monotheism. Uncoolness is pretty much Judaism's brand. And then you urge us to be uncool Jews. So what exactly does that mean? Why is it so important right now?
You know, a few years ago, I was reading an article about a Supreme Court case that involved a high school football coach saying Christian prayers with his football players on the field at a public high school. Mm-hmm. And
that's called Friday night.
I know. You guys are like, what, is that a problem? Yes. And this went to the Supreme Court, and the court said this was fine. And I really thought about this, got this coach, he and his players, they're praying to Jesus, and I imagine like a Jewish kid, Jewish football player, standing apart, feeling awkward, uncomfortable, different. And I thought, good. And then I was like, oh God, no, not good. I don't want that Jewish kid to feel left out, or the Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or atheist kid. That is not acceptable. I disagree with that Supreme Court case entirely. And part of me is still like, good. I think we've spent so much time in America trying to be comfortable, and I want Jews to be comfortable. I want everyone in this country to be comfortable. I do not want anyone to feel like they are a guest at the American table. There's no guests here. We all own this table. It is our table. Let me be very clear. And the reality is that to be a Jew is to be different. To be different is to be uncomfortable. And that's okay, because comfort is really not the Jewish mission in the world. The Jewish mission in the world is to build a society that is the exact opposite of ancient Egypt, a society where we do not oppress the vulnerable, a society where we don't worship power and wealth, but we actually worship an infinite God. Right? That is the mission of Jewishness, and it has always been uncomfortable. Thousands of years ago, when we were like, hey guys, monotheism, no one thought that was a great idea. That was very uncomfortable. When we refused century after century to convert to Christianity, that was not popular. Got us killed a lot. Wasn't comfortable. But we stuck with who we were. When we introduced ideas like everyone is created in the divine image, that was not popular back in the day when human beings were thought of as property, oftentimes. Again and again, we've had these radical countercultural ideas, and it is not comfortable. And that's what I think Dara means by being uncool. And I want to just highlight a few pieces of our wisdom that I think we particularly need today. Number one, thinking in polarities. Our national conversation today consists of people screaming their one extreme truth at the top of their lungs and calling everyone else evil. That's not Jewish. If you look through Jewish tradition, it is a constant example of rabbis holding competing truths, right? The Torah tells us, love the stranger, love the non-Jew, welcome the non-Jew, care for the non-Jew. It also tells us, remember Amalek. Remember the Amalekites, which were a tribe that attacked the Israelites from behind. So love the stranger, but also remember some strangers want to kill you. Be open-hearted, but don't be naive. You gotta hold both of those. We are told, there's an old Hasidic saying that you should walk around with two pieces of paper in your pocket. One says, I am but dust and ashes, humility. The other says, the world was created just for me, pride. You need both. So that's the kind of thinking that we need today. Second thing I'll say is that there is this very old anti-Semitic lie that says that while Christianity is a religion of love, Judaism is a religion of law, legalistic, nitpicky, weedy, bad. But if you actually deign to perhaps study Jewish tradition, what you would find is that within those legalistic, nitpicky, weedy laws emerges a very high standard of love. So an example, we're told that if you've loaned someone money and you happen to see them coming down the street towards you a few weeks later, and you know they still can't afford to pay you back, you should actually turn around and walk the other way. Like, really? We need that specific a law? Jewish law is filled with this. Endless, weedy hypotheticals. You know this. You spent 5 years studying them. This person, in this situation, in this moment. It's exhausting. If you go to a store and you have no intention of buying anything, should you ask the shopkeeper the price of an item? No. Why? You'll humiliate them. Again, really? We can't just say be nice to workers and help the poor. But what Judaism is doing with all these endless, weedy hypotheticals is it is inculcating within you an exquisite sensitivity to the needs and humanity and dignity of this person, this shopkeeper, this person who's struggling financially. It is saying, see this human being. It's like going to the eye doctor, and each little hypothetical is like a click of that vision machine, making your vision finer and finer so you can see this image of God before you. And I gotta tell you, that is the exact opposite of this garbage ideology I see on college campuses where they say, forget individuals. No, we just divide everyone up into two crude, dehumanizing categories. Powerful, powerless, oppressor, oppressed, and we hate and love them accordingly. End of story. Which is like clicking the vision machine backwards so that everything is so blurry, you just see a couple of blobs and you don't even see them clearly. It's dehumanizing and it's cruel. The final thing I'll say is that modern secular society, we just abhor some of the most basic experiences of human existence. We are grossed out by death, dying, illness, aging. We want nothing to do with it. Our secular society says, run, send flowers, maybe a text, outsource that, just Botox it. Like, we don't want anything to do with this. There is a lot of just kind of horror at these aspects of life. And Judaism says, no, you run right to all of that. If someone is in mourning, you get your body to that shiva and you are with them. If someone is sick, you get your body to their bedside and you are with them. In these moments when people are in these disorienting, what are known as thin places, these places where the boundaries between life and death and heaven and earth thin out and they are scared and they are lost, we are told it is your job to hold them in loving community. You get right up close to them. Talk about countercultural wisdom. Talk about uncool. But this is what Jewish tradition offers. Like, we have always offered the world the kind of radical transformational wisdom that has shaped Western thought that I think we desperately need today in our very hyper-individualized, narcissistic, lonely society. We need Jewish wisdom about community, about love, about compassion and generosity and courage and wisdom. That's what we need, and I think that we have so much to offer, as do many other traditions, but this one's ours. So, let's embrace it, let's learn it, and let's celebrate it and share it with the world.
Thank you. Yeah. When you came in this evening, you probably got a card that is blank on one side, and that is so that you can write questions. If you have a question for Sarah this evening, we want to encourage you to write that down and just to kind of hold it up, because we've got some ushers. Where are our ushers? They're here somewhere, who will, I hope, come around if you hold up that card. Oh, there we go. Thank you. And collect that from you. Thank you, if you just hold those up. But while you are holding up those cards, there we go. And then thank you to Becky Branham, who is going to sort through those for us and take advantage of the time that we have left for Q&A. But while that's happening, for those, even while you're holding up your cards, so 36, okay, just like I happen to think that probably God had something to do with it being an Intro to Judaism class and not karate, although you can still do both. 36, come on, double high, you discover all of this, right? So what's next now? You've written these two books that are absolutely the topic of conversation around the Jewish English-speaking world. What's next?
So I'm actually starting a rabbinic program in January, which I'm really incredibly excited about. I don't plan to be a pulpit rabbi or to have a congregation. I hope to continue writing books. And I had thought about doing this over the years, but I always kind of resisted it. Like, no, my whole thing is that I'm just a regular Jew. I don't have any title or anything formal. I'm just like you. I'm on a journey. But the program I'm doing, which is with the Hartman Institute, which it is
good choice.
They're wonderful. And by the way, they have a great lay leaders program for the summer where lay people from across the country go to Jerusalem for, I think, 10 days or a week and learn. It's amazing. Check it out. They came to me and I was like, oh, no, thank you. And then they said, Sarah, like, you've written 2 books. You actually are not just kind of Jew on the street. Like, you have done some learning. It's a little bit disingenuous, which was true. And then they also sort of made the point that, you should do the learning, right? There are so many rabbis who have this systemic learning that I don't have. I've been doing this kind of autodidact, teaching myself, which isn't really working anymore. I can actually feel the limits of my knowledge. My Hebrew isn't good enough. I'm just hitting a ceiling at this point. And so I thought, actually, I should do that work. I should earn that credential. If I'm going to be speaking about Judaism, I should actually have the credential that, gives me that deeper wisdom that I think rabbis have. And so, once I understood it that way, I thought, yeah, I should do this. So I start in January, and it's it's an online program. It's time in Jerusalem each summer. I'm super excited. My
That's
classmates
amazing.
they're the most, I got their bios and I thought oh my God, they're amazing. So
It's going to be fantastic. I'm just jumping up here real quick because I think that Becky needs a microphone. I went to rabbinical school. I definitely did not want to be a pulpit rabbi, God forbid.
Really?
I went because I was raised without a Jewish education. And in college, I started to learn some stuff, and I decided that I wanted to know what the rabbis knew.
That's a good reason.
Good God. So I learned they know that they never stop learning.
That is very true.
Okay, so we had at least 4 people who are really, really interested in wanting to hear more about your time speech writing for presidents and how you approach the process of writing speeches for someone else's voice. But then also now, especially with recent events and what's happening in your life, how do you approach speech writing now for yourself?
Great question. Love this. So, I'll talk about Mrs. Obama because I wrote mainly for her. She is someone who just knows who she is and she always knows what she wants to say. So it's not about scripting her at all. When people say oh, you put words in her mouth, I'm like, it just makes me cringe because it was just the opposite. I would basically sit down with her and say okay, where's your head? What are you thinking? And she would give me this very long download of the points she wanted to make, the themes she wanted to hit, stories she wanted to tell, statistics she wanted to cite. And I would type as fast as possible on my laptop because she often just said great stuff. When they go low, we go high. That was hers, not mine. And so that download, that initial thing became the heart of my draft. So I would weave that into a draft. I would then circulate that to about 70 people in the White House. Fact checkers, lawyers, communications people, very tedious process that involved a lot of me yelling with people. A policy person might be like, she has to mention all 19 points of this healthcare plan and this speech. I was like, it's a high school commencement speech. No, she doesn't. hours, very tedious. And then I give her a draft. She would edit heavily. I give it back to her. We go back and forth. She would run through it, and then she would deliver it. So very elaborate process. Writing for myself is actually, I have much lower standards for my prepared speeches than Michelle Obama does, thank God. I mean, with her, it was she's a speaker's heart and a lawyer's mind. So every transition had to be perfect. The flow, the logic, the structure. She would just hone in on anything that was even minorly out of place. And always very nicely, she'd be like, okay, I think this transition doesn't quite work. She was always right. But for myself, I'm much more relaxed. It's just easier. I'm not worrying about the perfection of every line. It's more of a conversational kind of thing. But I have to say, I hear her voice in my head all the time, just being like, okay, you're kind of getting in the weeds, Sarah. What's the beating heart? What's the story? What's the feeling here? What are we missing? She was always, I think, asking herself, okay, what's true? Like what is the deepest, most important, most helpful truth that I can tell right now? She would just get very still and be like, what's really true here? And that's actually a great way to figure out what you want to say, because it often leads you to something deeper, something more profound, and sometimes something that's a little bit uncomfortable. But you gain a lot of credibility when you actually tell the truth. When there's a big elephant in the room and you actually say, okay, guys, we're all looking at an elephant. People are like, oh, okay. I think the politicians who go around with the hardworking American middle-class families are the heart of the American dream. It's like, what? Is that even, I don't even know what that is. You've never turned to your spouse and been like, honey, I think hardworking American, but you don't say to your neighbor, Bob, that's not, if you wouldn't say something to one person, it's generally good not to say it to many people. It doesn't actually, turns out it doesn't get better. And I think, I think she was just allergic to that slogan-y, pablum, insulting soundbite thing, and she more just wanted to talk like a human being and say what was true, and I think people appreciated that.
We are blessed as a congregation to have a lot of young people who are involved, and you've met some of them here tonight.
I saw some of them. Congratulations on their confirmation.
And so, as a group, they seem to have some questions. One question is, as your time visiting many different college campuses, and as they're preparing maybe to head off to college, what kind of advice do you have for young people? And specifically saying, what should they be ready and prepared to say if someone asks them, what is the difference between Christianity and Judaism? Or what is your view on Jesus? And what should they do if someone happens to say something negative about Jews or Jewish beliefs in front of them? How should they go about responding? How do they prepare themselves?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's such an important question. It's it says something very good about you that you're already thinking ahead. And I think it tells me how proud you are to be a Jew. It tells me that your Jewish identity is deep and sounds like you really want to live it in college. And I think that is amazing and a testament to this community and this rabbi. I think college campuses, they're so diverse, right? Some campuses are, I think, can be pretty hostile to Jews. Some are just wonderful. So I think it's important to understand that campuses are diverse, and even internally, campuses are diverse. Some parts might be more friendly, some might be less friendly. I think the key thing is to just know who you are as a Jew and know the truth about the Jewish story. I think it's actually helpful to learn a little bit about Israel before going to college, because I think there are a lot of lies circulating around college campuses about Israel. And if this had been going on back when I was in college, I would have been totally confused. I just would have believed what everyone was saying because so many people were saying it. Just centuries ago, so many people said that Jews drank Christian babies' blood. That was a very common libel in the Middle Ages. Fortunately, Jews knew their laws back then and knew that laws prohibited the drinking of blood. So they were like, that's a lie. So it's important for you to actually know about Israel's history and founding. And not to be self-serving, but my book actually has a simple chapter 5, that will give you the history of Israel, so you have a good sense of kind of what happened, and so that you know actually the challenging aspects of its history. Israel's a country. Pretty much every country is founded in violence and maintained in violence. Israel was founded like many other countries, and so it's actually important that you know all the complexities, the hard parts, the painful parts, the beautiful parts, so that when you get to campus and people say things like settler colonialism or genocide, you can say, actually, no, wait a second, that's not true. Let me tell you the history. And I think in terms of the difference between Judaism and Christianity, I think it's, I don't think you have to be some scholar of Jewish religion, right? You don't have to go and learn the whole Torah. I think you can tell them, let me tell you what Judaism means to me. And you don't have to do some compare and contrast. You're not a scholar of religion. You can say, here are what Jewish values mean to me. Here's what I love about being a Jew. Here's how I celebrate holidays with my family. That's a great answer, right? You should talk from your own experience. You don't have to be some expert. I think so often Jewish students feel oh, I don't know enough. I might give the wrong answer. You know who you are, right? You know your Jewish joy and your Jewish pride, and you should feel comfortable sharing that. I would also say, I often tell college students, pick your battles. I think there are a small number of very extreme, loud ideologues who you're not going to have a conversation with. I actually had a college student play for me a recording. He said, I want to play this recording of me trying to talk to someone who had different views than I do. It's like, okay. And literally this guy, he was like, you have blood on your hands, you're killing babies. And the kid was like, thanks, man, for engaging me in dialogue. The guy's like, you're a genocidal maniac. And he was like, wow, I hear that you have strong, okay, don't engage with that guy. Not your guy to engage with. But if someone just genuinely doesn't know, right? They don't know, they're curious. I think that we oftentimes are a little hard on people if they say not quite the right word, or if they're some of the language they use is awkward, but no one's perfect, right? Sometimes people just don't know, and so you can say oh, it's interesting, you use that word, actually we prefer this one, and let me share with you some of my tradition. And even if someone has strong opinions, if they're willing to engage with you respectfully, I think that can be a powerful kind of moment. There's a great book that just came out by a woman named Isabella Tarborovsky called How to Be a Refusenik, and it's actually to prepare college students for college. So it's not a big book, it seems very straightforward. I think that can be really helpful. And I also just think find a Jewish community, Hillel, Chabad, whatever your campus has, and just dig in and enjoy it. Have Jewish joy, have fun, go to Israel with your friends, study with your friends, really have that refuge and that strong Jewish life like you have here, because I think that'll make the experience much richer.
We are unusual being out here on the prairie of having a really strong number of converts, and we're constantly having converts into our community. And so there's a theme amongst a few of these questions that are kind of relating to the concept or the idea that when converts come into Jewish community, oftentimes they're met by people saying, oh, why would you want to do this? You must be crazy to want to join us. And yet the converts are studying really, really hard. They're trying to learn all of this that you're talking about so that they can feel like they're somehow being included into the Jewish community. And yet sometimes we also have, lifelong people who are members, growing up and are kind of saying, well, maybe I don't want to have to put that much amount of time into all of this study. And so, a little bit of tension or friction between that. And so what you were saying earlier tonight, that these kind of two books that you've written are your exploration of learning how to think like a Jew. How do you think that all of us together can move towards to thinking as a Jew?
Yeah. First of all, I think if every Jew in America knew half as much as the average Jew by choice, we would be the most learned community ever. I just the deep learning, the seriousness that Jews by choice bring to our community is the greatest blessing. So I just I'm a very big fan of Jews by choice. I'm also a very big fan of those who choose not to convert but are part of our community, right? Are married to Jews, are part of our community, are raising Jewish kids. What a blessing. What a gift, to travel with us as part of our community, part of our people. I just feel the more radically we can be grateful for these, for all of you, I'm just a really big fan. And look, here's what I'll say, Judaism, it's a lifelong learning thing. I think there are a gazillion different ways to be Jewish. I don't care how you practice, it is none of my business. I think they're all great. The one way that I think is not great is to be a contentless Jew. Mm-hmm. That was what I was for most of my life. I don't think that's a great way to be a Jew. But whatever content you want to fill your life with is great. Maybe you love ritual. Maybe you love ethics. Maybe you love spirituality, Shabbat. I don't care, right? Just dig into the content that is meaningful for you and fill up your Jewish identity. So I think, the reality is I'm always going to feel like a beginner. I've written these 2 books. I've read hundreds of books. I've taken classes. I feel like I know nothing. I really feel like I am just the most unlearned Jew. And because I look at Jews who are so much more learned than I am, and I think I don't know as much as that rabbi. Mm-hmm. But then when I talk to that rabbi, she's like, well, I'm actually just kind of a beginner. I really look at that rabbi, and he really knows more than me. And that rabbi's like, well, actually, it's this endless chain of no one's an expert, right? This is a vast ocean, and you just swim in it. You don't drink the whole thing. It's an ocean you spend your lifetime swimming in. So I just think the trick is to always be learning however you learn best. Some people learn by listening to podcasts or lectures. Some learn by visiting Jewish communities and just talking to people. Some learn by reading. Some learn by doing, by hosting Shabbat, by engaging in ritual. I don't care how you learn, The trick is to just dive in and keep doing it for the rest of your life. That's what it means to be a Jew.
Well, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that Becky Branham, who is sorting through these questions, is actually co-chair of our Adult Education Committee. And Becky has put together, along with her co-chair Lisa Howard, but Becky takes on this Jewish literacy project where it's a really accessible way for people to come in and to learn together in what is a unintimidating way to delve in with others. And Lisa really focuses her sessions in a different program on bringing together women specifically with coffee and croissants for more the lifestyle conversation. So we have this balance of this lifestyle and this deeper learning.
I
So
love this.
you can come to that.
And by the way, like, there are a lot of people, like, my books were an answer to this question of, like, okay, how do I start learning? Because it was so hard for me, I wanted to make it easier for other Jews and any people of any background who want to learn. But a lot of people have their answers, right? There are people who host podcasts, who make movies, who write other books. Like, there are so many answers that people are offering to, like, okay, how do I start learning? And I think it's good to check out lots of them.
Yeah.
See which ones resonate for you.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I think
this
we have
journey.
One
Huh?
more.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, okay, two more, okay.
I'll be quick.
sorry, 'cause I got two more.
Okay.
This journey that you've been on obviously has taken you, way off the path where you started. And so people are wondering, how have your family, your relationships, your friends, how have they all responded to this Jewish journey that you've been on?
I think with some confusion at first. My parents were like, okay, sweetie, this is what you want. I think they were a little just not sure what this was, but I think when they saw how happy I was and how engaged I was, I think there's been a lot of pride, actually, and a lot of joy in my joy. And I do think just, to be honest, like, it has shifted some of my friendships. It has shifted my community. I tend to kind of gravitate more towards Jewish spaces now. I tend to, because that's really what is sort of central to my life right now. And I think that's pretty typical. It's like when your kid enters school, your friendships become their friends' parents. It's like your community kind of shifts based on where you are in your life. But I will say in the White House, like, my colleagues were so supportive of my Jewish learning. I mean, I literally told them at one point, I was like, I want to have a rigorous Shabbat practice. I want to experiment with this. So I'm going to be offline for 25 hours, which in the White House is like saying, I'm not going to wear clothes in the office. Like, that's how, it's like so socially inappropriate that but like, my colleagues were like, amazing, we're not going to bother you, like, do this thing, tell us what it's like. And I will say one December, I was in the White House cafeteria and the chief of staff walked in, and he's this lovely guy, and he's, but chief of staff, big, serious position. And he said to me, oh, what are you doing for the December break? And the answer was that I was going to a week-long silent Jewish meditation retreat, which is weird. And I was like, I don't want to tell him this. But I didn't want to lie, so I told him, and he said, Sarah, I am so proud of you. What an amazing thing for you to do. I'm so, like, good for you. I want to hear all about it. And I will tell you, this guy, he's a devout Catholic, no way Jewish. He has, like, bought and read both my books, called me to tell me that he didn't understand them, but he loved them and was proud of me. He's come to both my book events. I mean, it just, like, this is my colleagues, like, I look out in the audience at my book launches in DC, and, like, there are my colleagues. Jewish, not Jewish, like, there was so much support among my friends, my colleagues, my family, and I'm really grateful for that. And by the way, like, they didn't change their practice.
Right.
I was on my own journey, but we're cool.
Right. Okay, so this is about you, but I just have to say that when I told my father that I was going to go to rabbinical school to be a rabbi, the first thing he said was, but you're a woman.
Oh, no.
The second thing he said was, well, you're not going to grow a beard, are you?
That's
So
wow. Okay.
there you go.
That's
okay,
wow.
last question.
Last question. I apologize to anybody that we didn't get to your question. Maybe you'll have a chance to ask her later tonight. So, in the spirit of this being a rededication of our temple, and we're coming up on Hanukkah season, Our theme here as our congregation this year has been Bereshit, Ahavat Yisrael, from the beginning, having love for Israel. And so how do you think, in that spirit, that we can, especially in these kind of polarized, divisive times, how can we grow our relationships with each other in that spirit of love?
I love this question. I love this because what you're doing here illustrates that you all actually know what Jews are. We are not just a religion. All of us in this room who are Jewish can reject every aspect of Jewish religion, and we're still Jews. Nor are we a race. Jews are very diverse. We look like everyone. We are not an ethnicity, very diverse. So what are we? Like whatever the Ammonites, Hittites, Edomites are. So a tribe, a nation, a civilization, a peoplehood. But I actually think the best word for us is family. I think that we are a family. And, I think in that spirit, something I think would really be great is if we treat each other a little bit more like family. I think there's a lot of tendency to want to kind of attack and to argue and to this and that. And maybe that was okay in the 80s and 90s when they didn't seem to hate us too much. But a lot of people are not fond of us today. And I think it would be really good for us to just kind of double down on family, to understand that yes, Uncle Bernie is sexist and that annoys us, but he still comes to Seder, right? We still love Uncle Bernie, and we're gonna yell at him, and we're gonna try to get him to stop telling his terrible jokes, but he still gets to come to Seder. And a dear friend of mine named Michal Beton, who's a brilliant sociologist, whose writing is worth reading. She's the kind of a spiritual director of a synagogue in New York, and a young person wrote her an email and said, "I am an anti-Zionist. Am I welcome in your synagogue?" And she wrote back and she said, "I want to be very clear. Every Jew on earth is welcome in this community, period. End of story." She said, "There is no litmus test. I do not care about your ideology at all." She said, "And just so you know, in our community, we do solidarity. So we will say the prayer for our IDF soldiers. We will say the prayer for our hostages, and we will sing Hatikva. We do that not because we have any particular ideology around Israel. We're actually quite diverse. We do that out of solidarity with our family." And I really love that because I think too often we get obsessed with ideology and we fight about that and tear each other apart over that. And I would like us more to focus on solidarity and on family. And I think it sounds like that's what you're doing here. And I think reminding ourselves every time we want to just, debate, attack, be nasty, say the mean thing, just to think, okay, wait, family, solidarity. Let me still say that thing, but with love. And substantively, we're gonna have a kind conversation. But remembering, this is my family. And sometimes we take family for granted, and that's a mistake. We have to actually do the work of family. And so it feels like that's what you're doing here, and I think that will really help your community continue to thrive.
I sure hope so. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, Here All Along, that's the short name of the book, and As a Jew are both available for purchase in the lounge, and Sarah has graciously agreed to stay as long as it takes to sign as many books as people want signed, including if you brought your own copy with you, all good. We also have an incredible oneg in the next room with much thanks to the many people who baked for this beautiful reception. We have shared some Torah. We have shared some prayer. Torah, Avodah, Gimilut Chasadim is our charge going forward to treat each other with kindness. James mentioned it before. I'm not sure if she was in earshot, so I want to make sure that Debbie Johnson knows how much we appreciate from soup to nuts her planning of this evening, along with a very big team of people who have helped. And finally, a thank you to Sarah Horwitz.